Hello, I'm Jeff Hajek, and for the next few minutes, I will be talking to you about what KPI indicators are. So, if I'm going to have a course on the KPI bowler, it's pretty important to explain what KPIs are that go onto this bowler. So, let's just start out with this the general overview, and let's talk about what KPIs are in a big picture. So, they are the most important metrics you have in the company, and they're the things that let me back up. Not in the company. The most important metrics for a particular organization. So policy deployment will have its own set of metrics, and those are the ones that tie into the 3 to 5 year long-term goals and the breakthrough objectives, the annual breakthrough objectives that you want to try to hit to really reach these highest levels of performance. So policy deployment are your most important metrics, and then KPIs would be kind of the next level that would be the ones that are for most departments within the organization. The KPIs is the most important one that they will be focusing on. And they should tie into their top level PD. But for an organization, it is what becomes their most important metrics that they use, hence key. The other word that should jump out at you, key is a big one, most important. The second word is indicator. So the indicator means that it is linked to something else. So it indicates that there's something going on. And generally, you want that link to be to a process. We want to make sure that we have some understanding of the processes behind the KPIs. And then the final part of this is that KPIs are most effective when they're used as part of a system, as part of a big picture, as part of a holistic approach to your management of the organization. So if you just throw in a KPI, but you don't have the structure in place to manage it, collect the data, analyze it, process it, and use it to make improvements and manage with it, KPIs are just going to be kind of a waste of your effort. So I recommend that when you do put KPIs in place and start using the bowler, that you have it tied into a system. And the system doesn't have to be done right away, but you should have a plan on how to build the system around your KPIs and your KPI bowlers. So let's talk about the different types of KPIs. And there's a couple ways you can categorize KPIs. And in this picture here, this slide here, I'm going to talk about it in terms of time. So there are permanent KPIs that you want to have for your organization. And the permanent KPIs are the ones that are related to your core business or the most important things that you do. So, I don't know how the two things would be different, but you have core operations that you do as an organization, and those are things you want to measure continuously. So when I talk about KPIs being permanent, in most companies, permanent is 3 to 5 years. So anything outside of 3 to 5 years, think back 3 to 5 years ago and how much stuff is the same. And there's some things that would be done continuously over time in terms of kind of the philosophies and things like that. But in terms of the processes you have, if somebody left the company 5 years ago and came back today, could they jump right back in, or would they have to relearn how to do everything? They might have different computer systems, and everything changes over time very quickly. So permanent is this relative term in terms of lifespan of a company. And the core pieces of it, though, sometimes do stay the same. The other thing is, when I talk permanent, if a KPI never moves, if it doesn't budge, if you're so good at something that you never see a change on it, you may not want to spend effort collecting the data on that one, especially if it's like something that would be very obvious if you started missing on. So if it's something that is really core to the company and you start missing on it, you'll know that pretty quickly. So there may not be a big utility in measuring that and doing all the data collection work and the processing work and reporting work that goes along with a KPI if this is something that is so robust that it never needs to be tracked. Now, if it does start to see fluctuation, you want to put that back. And how long something has to be stable before you are willing to stop tracking it, that's really up to you. But again, there's a permanent one that is basically going to be that you go in it with this year thinking you're already going to be having that on your listing of KPIs on your bowler for next year. The last two types are both temporary, and some of them are going to be problem-based and some are project-based. So the reason why they're on there is One is about problems, one is about opportunities. So if you have a problem that comes up on something that's important to your organization, you'll often see that turn into a KPI. And now I'm not talking about a little one that you would deal with on a short-term basis. I'm talking about something that's more major, that's been going on for quite a while, that you don't see an immediate fix for. You'll want to put a KPI in place with an improvement plan to back it up. And then you want to track it and make sure that you're on pace with your plan that you're putting together. And in project-based ones, the actual implementation is going to be very similar to a problem-based KPI. It's just the reason you put it in there. And most project, or at least many project-based KPIs, are going to come as a result of the cascading from your policy deployment. So the senior leaders set up the policy deployment, and they slice up the responsibility among all the other leaders, and each leader down in their organization starts breaking it up into who is going to help them hit their targets, and that turns into KPIs. And it tells you what processes you need to work on. So project-based KPIs are attacking these opportunities. Problem-based KPIs are going after the problems that have started popping up that you don't see a quick fix or something that you know how to do right away, and you think it's going to take a while. And again, both of these, you leave the KPIs in place until you see stability for a set period of time, whatever your organization feels comfortable with. So I also mentioned this on the first slide, talking about KPIs are indicators, key performance indicator, and that means that they tell you something about something else. So something else should nearly always be a process. So you should always have your KPIs, at least in your mind, linked to the processes that are breaking when a KPI is telling you something is wrong. And there's two ways these indicators work. There's the leading indicators and lagging indicators. Now, leading indicators are things that tell you something in advance where there's still time to make change before something happens. Lagging indicators tell you something broke in the past, and now you're seeing the impact of that break. And as you can imagine, leading indicators are a lot more desirable because it gives you time to react and prevent a problem. Lagging indicators tell you something already happened. Now, the difference, like most things, you'd say, well, why don't you just use this only leading indicators? Well, if you could, yeah, do it. But the problem is leading indicators are a lot harder to find because you don't always know the exact relationship. They're a lot harder to be exact science. So a leading indicator may be 80% or 60% or 40% reliable. And you still might decide that it's worth it to track to be able to prevent, but you might find yourself chasing ghosts a lot if your leading indicator isn't really robust in terms of how accurate it is. And they also are a lot harder to come up with. So not only are they not as effective sometimes because they're not as accurate, they're also harder to really identify in a way that's usable. So as an example, let's say, rather than dive into, trying to make an example for a business, let's talk about beaches. So let's say you're selling ice cream as a vendor on a beach, and you need to buy the ice cream in advance and bring it there and stock your store. How are you going to do that? If you run out, you need to buy more. That's a lagging indicator, but it means you're losing sales. So what would you use as an indicator in advance to say, I want to buy ice cream to make sure I have enough? And most people would have the obvious conclusion, the weather forecast. If it's predicted to be 90 degrees tomorrow, you buy more ice cream. If it's predicted to be 60 degrees, you buy less ice cream. And over time, you'll be able to understand the relationship between temperature and ice cream sales. So that's a leading indicator because it lets you do something with that information before whatever the process happens. Lagging indicators are the opposite. Let's say you are tracking paint bubbles on a piece of, you'd have a paint booth as your process. Your operation is a paint team, and one of your metrics is to track the amount of paint bubbles per surface area. So you have some metric in place. You know what the process is that's linked to that. When you start seeing the paint bubbles, it'll tell you something broke in the process, but you can go back and fix that, but you've already had a lot of paint done, so it's a lagging indicator. you'd rather be able to tell in advance, but it's often hard to say what is it that caused, it's often hard to measure the right things to make sure you don't have that problem come up. So lagging indicators, leading indicators. Now, the other question that people gravitate to right away when they start talking about KPI bowlers is how many KPIs should you have? And I talked about it in a previous lesson that you have QDCSM. Those are typical categories that you'll see for a KPI bowler. And on that, each of those categories, my rule of thumb is between 1 and 3 KPIs per category at the most, and 9 total for the whole page, for the whole KPI bowler. And the reason I say that is if you get too many KPIs, it's not really key anymore. You've diluted your effort. So as you get a bigger organization, you can have more people means more areas that you can focus on and more areas total. So, as a bigger organization, you're doing more, and you have more KPIs doesn't mean less focus because you have more things that you're looking at total. So a bigger organization can handle more KPIs without losing focus. Small organizations, the problem is that you don't do as much. So if you get too many KPIs, you're basically trying to measure everything, and that doesn't create focus, doesn't create that key in key performance indicators. And so a small organization, you only have limited resources as well. So if you are trying to track 9 KPIs with an organization with 6 or 7 people, that's a lot of work spent tracking and monitoring and updating and that sort of thing. So small organizations, you want to have fewer KPIs because it puts less load on the organization and keeps you from, if you don't have the resources to do anything about stuff anyway, you want to make sure those resources you use are extremely judiciously allocated. So you want to make sure that it's really effective, and you only do that if you really are dialed in on the focus. Now, where do KPIs come from? Well, if you know your own organization, you've been in it for a long time, a lot of times the KPIs are very organically created. You know what you need to do well, you know processes or problems, and you create your own set of KPIs from within the organization. So that one we'll just take as a given that you'll have some KPIs that'll come up because you know your team, you know your organization, you know what you're supposed to be doing, you know your processes, and it's a natural flow. But there's a couple of other ways that KPIs, a couple of other origins for them, and the first 2 are related to customers. So there's a thing called VOC, voice of the customer, and this is basically the overall collective contacts with the customer. So whether it's data that you accumulate from warranty claims or purchasing information or customer inquiries on your website or whatever that is, all that collection of contact with the customer is the voice of the customer. And you can use that to say what is important to them. And, you have to be able to know how to sift through that. And everybody always asks for everything when they say what they want, but you got to look for the between the lines of what are they actually willing to pay for and what is most important to them. But if you learn how to read the VOC very effectively, you can come up with some good KPIs to try to capitalize on those needs, especially if there's things that you aren't meeting right now. The second one is customer promises. So all your marketing information that you put out there and all the warranty claims you put on your, the warranty information you put on your products and all the terms and conditions you post, those are all promises you're making to the customer after the purchase is made or at the time of the purchase. So if you make those promises and you're not delivering on those, you need to do something about it. That's the source for KPIs. You'll often have, in number 3, you'll often have legal requirements that come into play. And this might be something for, if you're an FDA or an FA, the Food and Drug Administration or the Federal Aviation Association or whatever the A is. The actual organization creates legal requirements. OSHA is another one that has legal requirements for safety. So these are all things that you have to track. And if you're out of compliance, you have to get back in compliance. And often that means a good KPI to make sure you get there. And then I mentioned before policy deployment. So this is the top level, leaders in the organization. They own these the responsibility to make these gains, and it gets parceled out within their organizations, the subordinate organizations, and that trickles down to the next level KPI or next level policy deployment. So second level, maybe third level if you have a really big organization, but eventually that PD turns into KPIs for you. Now, I talked about this kind of in general. There is a linkage between policy deployment and the KPIs that you're using. So in the big picture, policy deployment starts out with 3 to 5 year goals. And every year, it's a rolling 3 to 5 year goal. You'll take some off, you'll add some new ones on, you'll extend them out, bring them back in. But you have this 3 to 5 year goal. And you take that goal and you turn it into an annual breakthrough objective. Now, the breakthrough objective is the slice of that 3 to 5 year goal that you're going to focus on this year. And it should be aggressive. We normally front load these goals. And again, I talked about permanence. If you're an organization, 3 to 5 years is a lifetime. So you're really trying to say how, in terms of the window of where you can actually reasonably predict things. But you want to be front loaded because things change, leadership changes, the organizational environment changes, and you want to be able to make sure that you capitalize on these opportunities as quickly as possible. So front load your KPI or your breakthrough objectives. And these breakthrough objectives turn into improvement priorities, which should be focused on processes. So you'll be looking at the processes, and it might be like the bigger operational, like not a specific low-end process, but something bigger. And you focus on which processes are going to have the biggest chunk of the responsibility to make gains for these improvement priorities. And at the high level, if you're talking about like increasing sales in a region, it may be marketing involved, it may be your manufacturing team involved, engineering may be asked to make things cheaper or easier to produce. So there's a whole bunch of people that will have some hand in hitting these breakthrough objectives, and it turns into each of those subordinate groups. These are all still like probably high level VPs and things like that. They have some processes that they'll be able to link that up to. And then what they'll do is they'll turn that into quantifiable improvement targets. And these are the actual numbers where you say, this has to happen this much by this time. And again, linked to processes, but those targets then become in the PD, if you ever watch the videos on that, you kind of have this wheel and you rotate it. And those improvement targets turn into improvement priorities at the next level. And you set up new improvement targets for that level that breaks the upper level targets into smaller pieces. So the whole principle here is you take those pieces, you turn those last improvement targets, the lowest level PD targets, into KPIs. And what you really want to have is the ability to trace the lineage of your KPI up through each of the targets and see where it fits into the big picture. So when you talk about KPIs and linking down to or linking up to policy deployment, that's what we're talking about. KPIs are a slice of the policy deployment targets for each of the organizations. And if you go across the whole organization and look at all your KPIs and compile them all up, hitting your KPI targets should eventually mean you hit your PD targets at the second level. Hitting all those second levels should mean you're hitting at the first level. And that means that you're on track with your 3 to 5 year improvement goals. So that's how it all links back up. So with that said, that's what KPIs are and how they, how they fit into your KPI bowler. Have a good day.